About a month or two ago, we asked you to vote for your favorite Bible heroes and heroines. And we gave you a list, and we even had a write-in for a writing candidate. And you did vote. And we came up with the top 8 vote getters. Let's see, the results are 5 women and 3 men.
Of course.
7 from the Old Testament and just 1 from the New Testament. The top vote getter, however, was from the New Testament.
A woman. From the New Testament. Just so you know.
We didn't let you vote for Jesus, okay? And we're going to take these in the next 8 weeks in chronological order.
Chronological.
Yeah.
Because we're organized.
Yeah.
Well, part of us are.
And we're going to start with Rahab.
Rahab, Rahab, keep up.
Not Ahab.
Oh,
Rahab.
she said Ahab.
King of the burning sand?
Yeah.
No.
Let me set the stage.
Good credit.
At the end of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the children of Israel have wandered in the desert for 40 years, led by Moses. They're on the plains of Moab, which is east of the Jordan River. You can look across the Jordan into what we know as Israel today. They had, as I said, gotten there by a long and difficult wandering in the wilderness. So at the end of Deuteronomy, the very end of the last of the 5 books, Moses dies. Because he made a technical error somewhere and God said, you're not going to the promised land. And by the way, that whole generation dies of Israelites because they refused to trust in God. And only 2 didn't. One was named Joshua and the other was named Caleb. Well, when Moses dies, God essentially appoints Joshua as his successor. So the 6th book of the Old Testament is Joshua. They're gathered east of the Jordan on the plains of Moab. They can see across. The first city they see is a city called Jericho, which lies about 20 miles north and east of Jerusalem. And it's across the Jordan River, which isn't a huge river, by the way, at this point. Jericho looks like that. It's a city of walls and gates. The way this works is all the farmland and the pasture land is outside the city. So during the day, the soldiers and the people go out and they work the land. And at night, they come in and they close the gates. So they're protected from marauders and other invaders. So it's a walled and gated city. So you're standing there going, oh my goodness, what are we going to do with that? But then God tells Josh, it's time to move. It's time to move. So like any good military leader, Josh says, well, I better check this out. And sends in the spies, to check it out. And they come back and report, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. So, we're going to meet this woman named Rahab, and we're going to meet her in Joshua 2.
That's where the story begins. In Joshua 2, verse 1. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies to the western side of the Jordan. Go in and see what you can find out about the people in that area. Pay special attention to the city of Jericho. The men crossed the river, and when they entered Jericho, they stayed at the home of a prostitute named Rahab. lest we think that's an odd choice of a place to stay, God often uses people from the fringe. We've been talking about the outsiders and the people out of the mainstream of society for the last 6 months. Rahab is one of these. She is the other. But we're going to see how God can use her even for God's purpose. And perhaps they pick this home because they know there are people in and out. Men, warriors, soldiers who talk of their conquests, talk of their battle, tongues wag. Perhaps military secrets are divulged. And remember, these spies are going in to find out about the people and the defenses, so they will know how to approach and take over. We'll read on. Somehow, word reached the king of Jericho that Israelite spies had slipped into the area and might be visiting Rahab. That night, the king sent soldiers to Rahab's house with a message. The king commands you to turn over the Israelite men who are staying with you, because they are here to spy on all the land and its defenses. But Rahab had already hidden the 2 spies before she received the king's messengers. It's true that 2 men have been to see me, but I didn't take the time to ask them where they were from. All I know is that when it was getting dark outside and the gate was about to close, they got up and left. I don't know where they went from here. If you hurry up, you still might catch up with them. Well, Rahab was lying because the 2 men lay hidden where she had hidden them, beneath flat stalks of flax on her roof. The soldiers were ordered to open the gate long enough for them to pass through. Then the gate was closed. They took the road that went straight toward the narrower parts of the Jordan, which would be the easiest place for the spies to cross. But the 2 spies were still on Rahab's roof. She came up and found them awake. So, the moment that Rahab lies to the king's messengers, she becomes a traitor. She's risking her life and that of her family. And here's why. She says to the spies, I know the eternal God has given your people this land. Your coming has paralyzed us with fear. We have heard how God held back the Red Sea so you could escape from Egypt on dry land, and how you completely destroyed the Amorite kings and their kingdoms on the far side of the Jordan. As soon as this news reached us, our hearts melted like wax, and our courage left us. The Eternal One, your God, is truly the God of the heavens above and the earth below. So Rahab had heard the stories about Joshua and his men, how God was on their side. And these stories put the fear of God into her. She says, because I know all these things, this is my request. Since I have treated you kindly and have protected you, please promise me, by the word of the eternal God, that you will do the same for my family. Give me some sign of good faith that when you destroy the city, you will spare my father and mother and brother and sister and their families from death. The spies answer her, you had the power to turn us in, but you saved us. Now we will do the same for you. If you promise not to tell anyone what we're doing here, then you have our word. We will treat you with kindness and faithfulness when God gives us the land. So Rahab is scared, but she's not too scared to cut a deal. She says, I've hidden you. Now, can you do something for me? I'm concerned about my family. I'm concerned about my family. This woman is a harlot. This woman is not well thought of in the community. This woman is on the other side of the tracks. But like the mainstream of society, like most of us, we share values. And her core value is care and concern for her family. Would you protect my family? Well, since the wall of her house was actually part of the great city wall, she helped the men escape by simply lowering the rope for them through the window. Before they climbed down, she advised them to go into the mountains. That way you won't be where the soldiers expect you to be, she said. You'll hide there for 3 days. The pursuers should have returned to town by then, and you can go back safely. The men thought it over, and they answered her. We will keep the oath we have sworn to you, but only if you follow these instructions. Gather all of your family here in this house, and tie this scarlet cord in the window where you let us down. If anyone goes out of the house and into the streets, we can't be responsible for what happens to them. They will be killed, and their blood will be on their own hands, not on ours. We will be responsible if anything should happen to anyone you gather in here. But remember, all of this depends on you keeping your word. If you tell anyone our business, you will free us from our oath. Rahab agreed. The men climbed down and escaped into the night, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window.
Many of you probably remember the rest of the story from your Sunday school class, if you've been to Sunday school. The Israelites are told, the spies return, they tell Joshua what they found out. Joshua has a vision again from God on how to go about conquering the city of Jericho. But first they got to get across the river. God says, just take the Ark of the Covenant, you know, Indiana Jones movie, the Ark of the Covenant. Take it out there in the Jordan, and it will part just like the Red Sea did. And it did. And the Israelites crossed on dry ground and surrounded Jericho. And God said, I'll give the city to you. Here's all you have to do. Just march around it for 7 days. And then at the 7th day, you give a shout and sing it and sound the trumpets, and the city will be yours. Just with the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Just with the battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down.
Yay!
You know that song. Very good.
That's what I was told to do.
What about Rahab?
The rest of the story.
The rest of the story. We just covered 3 chapters in one song. So we're in chapter 6, verse 22 to 25. Joshua was speaking to the 2 spies. Go back to the house of the prostitute and bring her out with all of those who have hidden there so that you can keep your word. So they set off through the destruction, found Rahab's house, and brought her and all she had, father and mother, brothers and sisters, and all her relatives out of the fallen city to a place outside the camp of Israel. So Jericho was destroyed completely, burned to the ground, except for the precious metals and iron and bronze vessels that were put into the treasury of the eternal God's house. But Joshua spared the life of Rahab the prostitute, all of her family, and all she had, because she was faithful to the spies he had sent. And she lived among the Israelites from that day on. You see, God always keeps God's promises. As God's followers, we are to always keep our promises. God has a purpose for everyone. Even a prostitute, even a woman, especially people on the fringe, especially people outside the mainstream.
Pastor and author Rick Warren writes in The Purpose-Driven Life about everyone, those in the mainstream and those on the fringe, having a purpose, and how God uses all of us for God's purpose, and how all are expected to be involved in fulfilling God's purposes. He writes, if you're not involved in any service or ministry, what excuse have you been using? Abraham was old, and Jacob was insecure. Leah was unattractive, and Joseph was abused.
Moses stuttered. Gideon was poor. Samson was codependent. Rahab was immoral.
You know, David had an affair and all kinds of family problems. Elijah was suicidal, Jeremiah was depressed, and Jonah was oh so reluctant.
Naomi was a widow. John the Baptist was eccentric, to say the least. Peter was hot-tempered and impulsive.
And Martha worried a lot, and the Samaritan woman had several failed marriages.
Zacchaeus was unpopular, and Thomas doubted.
Paul was in poor health, and Timothy was timid.
Ordinary people just like us. What a variety of misfits. But God used each of them in God's service. And God will use me and you too, if we just stop making excuses. Amen.
Amen.